Welcome to Relay Chain, a podcast produced by Parity Technologies where we discuss all things Substrate, Polkadot, and Web3. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to let you know about our virtual conference on 28 April, Sub-Zero Online. Join Substrate developers from Parity and the community, including Polkadot founder Gavin Wood, as they share their latest work on the Substrate framework. Go register at subzero.parity.io. You can find the link in the show notes. And now, our episode with Anita. In today's episode of Relay Chain, I had Anita Mujumdar from Evercity. Evercity is focused on using blockchain to aid in financing sustainability projects to meet the UN's 2030 climate action goals. Anita's work has been recognized by the UN, and she spoke at their climate conference in December of 2019. In this episode, we talked about how she got interested in climate finance, what a sustainable city looks like, and how Evercity and Robonomics are using blockchain to drive their initiatives. Today on Relay Chain, we have Anita Mujumdar from Evercity. Welcome to the show, Anita. Can you give yourself a quick introduction?
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for inviting. It's really nice to be here. I'm with Evercity, an ecosystem of smart sustainable city solutions and a platform for impact measurement, management, and investment. I've been working in this team for more than 2 years now, and my background is in international relations and sustainable development. So back at the university, I was very interested in topics such as funding for renewable energy, rural development in such countries as India and Bangladesh, because I have a partially Indian background, so I'm half Russian, half Indian. So I always wanted to know what are the economic mechanisms to help fund sustainability-aligned projects in those countries. And this is how I got involved, first in Russian Carbon Fund, then in Evercity and other projects related to blockchain implementation.
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot that we can go into here. So you told me earlier that you're interested in climate finance and sustainable digital finance. Can you talk about what those are? Because we don't usually hear like climate finance together.
Sure. So climate finance is basically a way to fund projects to reduce carbon emissions. And you could speak more broadly about impact finance, so finance for sustainable development goals. So as you may know, in 2015, UN adopted Sustainable Development Goals, which should be attained by 2030 to ensure that we meet climate goals, Paris Agreement goals, that we cope with poverty, we ensure clean water for all, and all other important initiatives for sustainable development. And now it is acknowledged that there is a big gap. So there is like a 2.5 trillion gap yearly of investments needed to cover those sustainable development goals. And how do you do this? You need to fund them somehow. So different agencies, governments are allocating funds in different ways. So there is, for example, Green Climate Fund, which aims to mobilize like $100 billion for the climate projects. And there is also Europe Green Deal, like recently announced, and they aim to mobilize up to $1 trillion to climate projects to attain climate neutrality. So it's like a huge amount of money. And those are climate finance to cope with climate challenges, to attain climate neutrality. But also there are different issues related to those climate initiatives.
Yeah, so what got you interested in this space in the first place?
So for me, the primary interest was how do you ensure that sustainable development goals are met, because they're not trivial. The current economic system as it is created does not provide a lot of incentives for something that comes out of profit, and climate and environment is something that is a little bit beyond profit. So there are many economic theories about this that I studied back in the university, and I learned more in Russian Carbon Fund in Evercity. They were related to property rights and to the liability for damage, liability for polluting. And theories by Austrian Economic School and by Ronald Coase, he's a British economist, won Nobel Prize in 1991. And they created theories of social cost. So the main idea is that when there is a polluter and then there is a buyer, so who of them is responsible, who is liable for pollution? So the theory is that when you buy some goods from the polluter, you also take the liability. And then between the polluter and the buyer, you establish an economic mechanism of transferring those negative outcomes. So
Yeah, so I want to get into the economics a little bit later.
Yeah,
And I know like the founder of the DAO IPCI, Anton Glenovich,
yeah,
wrote a
yeah,
lot about like
yeah, exactly.
about coasts and the kind of the exchange in these markets. But so you were interested in it from like an economic point of view.
Yes, I was interested in economic and in development point of view because I was very much interested in rural development. You know, those kind of concepts like microfinance for small rural communities in India. So I was doing some research in this in the university. And I wanted to find like mechanisms that really work in practice. How can you do this? What are the innovative ways to do this? That's how I got involved.
Yeah, and I mean economics you can apply to a lot of different fields. Like why were you specifically passionate about like climate and sustainability?
Um, well, because this is like the key topic of our generation, right? Climate. Because this is the challenge that we're going to live with, and we can acknowledge it or not, but climate is changing, you know. And I see it with my own eyes, you know. In Russia this year there was no snow on New Year there was a little bit of snow, but before that whole December it was like +5 degrees, and this is abnormal, totally. Never seen that in my life. And this is like a real evidence that climate is changing. And then I went to India and it was freezing there. So you see that climate movements, they're not not uniform. There are different processes going on, and we have to account for them. We have to understand how to deal with them and how to adapt and mitigate. So there's like not something theoretical, but real life challenges. So this is why I'm interested.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different approaches to sustainability and like fighting climate change. You're focused a lot on smart cities or sustainable smart cities. Can you talk about just like maybe outside of just the smart cities, like what are like the macro approaches to this problem right now?
Okay, so if we talk about the concept of smart cities, in every city, we are very much focused on this idea because there is evidence that national governments are not necessarily the most efficient way to solve climate problems. And cities are the ones who are faced with most challenges, but also they're mostly interested in fighting those challenges. So, you know, cities for a very long time, even if you look 500 years back, there have been cases of cities being autonomous and having unions that govern themselves. Like, you know, there was Hanseatic League in the north in the Baltic Sea, which united some ports and trade cities from Germany, Belgium, Russia, Hamburg. Hamburg was one of them, one of the cities. And the capital was Lübeck. So those cities had their own legislation, which is like pretty amazing. They had the legislation, they had lobbying, and they had some trade mechanisms between within themselves to promote their interests. And now, if you take this idea from 500 years back and bring it now, so the cities are the ones which are faced with climate challenges, and they want to do things which are not necessarily supported by national governments. So they can establish their own unions, and they can exchange mechanisms with the help of technology, with the help of decentralized technology. And this is where we come in with blockchain and so on.
So why do you think that is? Why are they more invested or why do they care more about these issues than a nation state?
Just a very simple reason. Cities have a very big population which is growing, and we have urbanization going on everywhere. And they also have the biggest challenges, and they have to adapt, right? Because all the climate challenges, waste problems, sustainable. Even if you talk about sustainable agriculture, it also comes in the value chain of smart cities, because you have to source food sustainably. You have to ensure that there is enough for everyone. You have to ensure that there is no traffic congestion. So cities like are center of everything that's going on. For example, in Jakarta, you know. The traffic is so bad that you cannot get to the airport on time. So you have to plan like 5 hours in advance. 5 years, yeah. So and they're actually relocating the capital because of those reasons, because you cannot live in the city. So rural areas don't have that much of the problem. And nation states, they just cannot focus on all kind of problems. So it's much better when the city, which knows its problem, governs itself, finds the best way to cope with those challenges.
Yeah, so when we talk about, like, there's so many challenges, like you just said, like there's getting food, which will probably come a lot from rural areas, and then there's like carbon emissions from vehicles and within the city. When you think about sustainability for a city, what factors are you looking at?
So when you look about sustainability, okay, there is source of food. How do you get it, and how do you ensure that it has been sourced sustainably? So you need to monitor all this stuff. And you can use technologies for that, like satellite IoT and so on. There is also air quality. You need to understand whether it is livable. And you can also make predictions and simulations to ensure that there is enough fresh air. You could optimize transportation routes based on air quality simulations and predictions. And then factories, of course, factories probably should not be located within the city. You should optimize them, probably put them away outside the city to ensure that there is no pollution. Well, one example is Delhi. I've just come from Delhi, and I made some environmental readings there, measurements, and the particle content was 10 times more than prescribed by World Health Organization. And
what kind of particle?
A particle, there is PM 2.5. There are particulate matter of certain size. There are 2.5 and there are 10, and they're very bad for lungs. They cause cancer, and they're mainly caused by traffic, by combustion, and by factories, and so on. So those are really bad for you, and people are measuring them in order to make sure that that they stay within the safe limit, because if it goes up, you just cannot live there. You have to wear a mask, and then the smog is so thick that you could see it with your naked eye. You don't even need to make any measurements. You can see that it's very bad. So, and the reasons for this bad situation is traffic, because they're not using fuel of very good quality. There are factories which are within the city, so they're on the outskirts, but it's very close. And when there is still air, there is no movement of air in winter. So all the pollution goes inside the city, it does not go out. And the third reason is agriculture, because right outside Delhi, there is another state which is so it grows a lot of crops like rice and wheat, and they have a system that they do not have enough time to rotate crops, so they have to burn whatever is left on the field. So they grow rice, then they burn everything, and then they plant wheat. I mean, they burn leftovers, not the fields. So they burn the leftovers, and then they plant wheat. So they don't have enough time to leave it for natural, rotting of this leftover. So this is why there is a lot of smog, and it all comes to the city. So this is the problem. Like, there are sustainability challenges in all different bits of economy, but the city is the one which suffered.
Yeah. So before we get to exactly the strategy or tactics and what you're going to measure, what would a sustainable city look like? What would be a nice sustainable city for you?
Okay, the nice sustainable city would be the one where decisions are driven by data. Like, you collect a lot of data with whatever means, with IoT devices, with satellites, with drones, monitoring, all kind of data on environment, on traffic, on people movements. A very important part of this sustainable city would be decentralization, because when you collect large amount of data, you don't want it to be stored in one single center. You want this data to belong to people, and this is the value of Evercity. It is very important for security, so decentralization would be a key. And then in this city, there would be centers, there would be mechanisms for making decisions based on analysis of this data. So, and then out of this, everything else would come, self-driving vehicles and other stuffs, and urban gardens, rooftop gardens, urban agriculture, everything that could come out of it. But it should be all based on real data that you collect.
Yeah, so I understand that the data is kind of informing the strategy of the city. But yeah, so you mentioned self-driving cars and urban agriculture. Can you talk about what the city looks like? So you would have urban agriculture, self-driving cars. Why is that important, and why is this the city that you would want to live in?
So I would want to live in a city where the decisions that I made are the most efficient ones. So in some city, it could be urban agriculture. For example, if there are problems with sourcing agriculture from somewhere else, if there are long supply chains. In other city, there could be, you could source agriculture from nearby farms. It would all depend on the place. So I want to live in the city where, again, the decision would be made based on efficiency. What is the best solution for this? Also, the city where you could influence the decision making by different means, and also the city where I could contribute somehow, where I could have my own somehow means of producing food and other stuff.
Yeah. So as we transition to blockchain, because some people would argue that these means exist, I guess depending on where you live, which country or city you live in, there are city councils or, ways to have an impact for an individual. So when we talk about like using blockchain, like what are some of the problems with the way that these cities are managed right now? Or any city. I mean, I don't know if we really have any truly smart cities.
Yeah.
I guess it's a very broad term, smart city.
Yeah, it is indeed. It is indeed very broad, and there are now only bits and pieces of smart city technologies being implemented. So there are basic problems. One is lack of scalability of solutions. So you have solution implemented somewhere, but you do not have enough funds allocated to scale it up. Or you have some solution on blockchain, for example, but you cannot scale it due to interoperability reasons. And this is why Substrate is very important technology for smart cities, because you need to ensure that different blockchains, different ways of collecting data can work with each other, can be interoperable. This is like the key issue, which is being discussed at all, UN conferences, and very important for them. Other reasons, like in cities, it's a lot about decision making. It's a lot about allocating funds, creating mechanisms for accelerating startups. So you want to make sure that there is a mechanism, there is a bridge to bring the ideas from their origin to actual implementation. There needs to be accelerators. So this is another thing that which we're doing at Evercity. We're trying to build this value chain of solutions. And this year, not this year, last year, last year we presented this at International Telecommunications Union, one of the UN bodies which deals with ICT, and they're very much focused on smart, sustainable cities. So ecosystem approach is very much at the core of what they believe is the key for change. And we won ecosystem best practice solution award for what we did. And what we did was a hackathon and accelerator, like demo days, trying to make those ideas and projects on blockchain and so on, and other technologies, blockchain, AI, IoT, from their generation to actual piloting and implementation.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the Robonomics one in a minute, but can you talk about so you mentioned there are all these kind of small pilot programs that their problem is they need to scale, or they need to be able to operate with other programs, right? Can you talk about some of these programs and what they look like?
So currently we have several big initiatives. The first one which we're working on is Evercity platform for impact measurement and investment. So the idea of this Evercity platform is that, for example, when a development bank wants to fund some kind of project, they want to make sure that the impact has actually been made. For example, you imagine that you're somewhere in Washington and you invest in rural Chile in solar power plant. You want to make sure how much electricity has been generated, what are the co-benefits, what are some negative implications. So you want, again, to measure and to take this data to allocate funds to this project based on the data that you collect. So we have done several small use cases related to those kind of technologies. One was related to issuance of renewable energy certificates in Chile on blockchain. So it was done with blockchain and IoT integration, done with Robonomics platform. And the idea was to bring some additional funding to this project on one side, and on the other side to prove to the potential funder, to the potential development bank, which amount of electricity has been generated by this power plant. So this is one initiative, and we're planning to scale this. So for 2020, Evercity has a roadmap to have at least 2 cases on impact measurement like this. One will be with energy sector, probably on issuing renewable energy certificates, probably on tracking origin of biomass for biomass power plant, making sure that it has been sustainably sourced and there has been no deforestation caused by planting this biomass and so on. So 2 cases would be on measurement. Yeah, energy, agriculture. We're planning a use case in Indonesia on also measuring the impact and measuring the condition of different farmers' produce, like melons and coffee. Planning to install different kind of devices like IoT, satellites, drones for measuring this. And the third case would be related to finance, again, to climate finance, to issuing different kinds of financial instruments to support climate projects. So those are our plans, and we are planning to scale them. There is another very interesting concept in relation to impact funds and their initiatives. So there are often cases when one project is funded by different development banks, so different impact funds. And they have a challenge of impact allocation. So, for example, I came first. I'm the bank, you're the bank. I came first. I gave like $100 to the project. And then you come and you give $100 to the project. And then there is some kind of impact. How do we decide who this impact belongs to? Who accounts for this? So you need to have a methodology for this, and you need to have a technical means to allocate this impact. And this is where blockchain and DAO concept are very useful and very convenient. So this is another big issue that we're exploring and that we would like to pilot and scale.
Yeah. So speaking of blockchain, you work with Robonomics and you just launched the public blockchain for open sensor networks, where you're going to be measuring air, water, and soil pollution with a network of IoT devices that interface with the Robonomics blockchain. Can you talk a bit about that program?
Sure. But first, I'll probably speak a little bit about Robonomics so that you have, our listeners have a better idea of what they do. So Robonomics platform has 4 years of R&D experience and different practical projects on integration of robots with blockchain. So the main idea behind what they do is that while in Industry 3.0 we had robots as a product, like in Industry 4.0 we have robots as a service, and we need to establish a mechanism for communication and economic relations between people and robots and between machines themselves. So Robonomics team has worked a lot on integration of IoT devices with Ethereum blockchain. They've been working with Substrate framework since, I think, late 2018. And they've done a lot of cases on decentralized management of drone fleets and other projects like this. So in 2016, together with the Robonomics team, our team of Russian Carbon Fund launched a project DAO PCI, which was it's called Integrated Platform for Climate Initiatives. And this project had the first carbon credit transaction on Ethereum blockchain, was acknowledged by Intel. So I'll just briefly say about this, and then it will be easier to understand why we are moving to these initiatives with smart devices. So DAO PCI had a lot of use cases, and some of them were related to IoT integration with blockchain, like for renewable energy certificates, for carbon credit, and so on. And the next step for scaling this initiative was to create a new framework, a new fork on Substrate, to create a decentralized decentralized database of environmental data collected with the smart devices all around the world. So the idea behind this initiative that we announced at COP was to educate climate action NGOs on the potential to use technologies for their measurements.
Can you say what COP is?
Yeah, COP is Climate Change Conference, Conference of Bodies. Yeah. So we announced this initiative at COP25 in Madrid, which initially was to take place in Chile, but it was moved to Madrid. Yeah, the idea of this project, Blockchain for Open Sensors Network, is first to educate climate action NGOs on the potential to use smart sensors and different devices and with blockchain integration to collect and store data. And for this year, our roadmap is to partner with probably 30 different participants, different climate action activists, NGOs, respectable NGOs, probably from our community, from Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and so on, to collect this environmental data, to visualize it, and to present it at next climate conference.
So how did you end up getting involved with Robonomics and meeting their team?
So as I said, in 2016, Russian Carbon Fund, whose founder is Alexei Shadrin, and he's also a founder of Evercity. He met with Sergey, and they started working on the project DAO PCI for green financial instruments on blockchain. And the third co-founder of this project was Dr. Anton Galinovich, who passed away last year. And he did a lot of research on economic theory and on environmental economics. So his ideas were based on the theories of Austrian Economic School and Ronald Coase, who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics in 1991. And those ideas were related to liability for environmental damages and to settlement mechanisms. And the core value of DAO IPCI was to create a P2P decentralized mechanism for the settlements, eliminating middlemen, eliminating any inefficiencies that can be caused by this.
Yeah, I read one of Anton's articles like last week. It was really interesting about the quantization of environmental effects. And like one part that he talked about was that a lot of times when a government comes in to try to fix a problem, they just end up creating another problem.
Exactly.
Because it's you have somebody who's causing some damage and then somebody who's being harmed. And then the government comes in and you have like now a third party. And so it's actually made the whole situation more complex. But like the peer-to-peer technology didn't really exist, several years ago. How do you think that like this DAO and blockchain in general can help solve some of these problems in a peer-to-peer fashion?
So blockchain creates an instrument for this peer-to-peer settlement. So blockchain allows issuing different green financial instruments based on their actual impact, based on the data collected, and it creates a mechanism for transactions. So it's like the best fit, the technology that fits best for this problem and this challenge. And the DAO concept, as I said, is very important for impact allocation in case of impact finance.
Yeah, so like, how are you going to use this data? Because like in the Robonomics sensor network, you're looking at air, water, and soil data. Like, what impact do you see that driving?
So, there are a little bit separate initiatives that we're talking about. If for merely the open sensors network project, the idea is to test the mechanism of collecting this data and putting it on Substrate. So it's more like a technical initiative, and then we're going to visualize this data and present it. But later, we're going to use this methodology and this test for Evercity platform. In this platform, we're going to collect this data for development banks and for impact funds who are funding different SDG projects in developing countries and other countries. And for them, this data will be key for decision making. It will be key for their reporting on the impact, for understanding whether the project that they're funding are actually delivering what they say they are delivering. And it will be the key for taking decisions on allocating more or less resources to this project. So this data that we'll collect will become a very valuable thing for development agencies.
Yeah, so like you mentioned at the beginning, I think like a $2.1 trillion gap in funding for environmental action.
Exactly.
And so this will help decide like how's the best way to allocate these funds.
Exactly, and it will help to understand how efficient is this data allocation. So we're trying to tackle this challenge.
So why not collect this data in a more centralized way? I mean, blockchain is usually used to solve like some sort of trust issue, right? Like you want to believe that the data has some veracity or integrity to it. So why is it important to have this data in a decentralized way?
Yeah, like you say, this is the issue of trust, because there is a very long chain of different people and different organizations involved in this climate finance space. So you want to make sure that at every stage the data is reliable and trustworthy. And also to establish global cooperation between different countries, different agencies. You also need to make sure that everyone trusts each other, everyone can rely on each other, because when a project reports on this data, you cannot really make sure that the data that it reports is accurate because everyone has their own interests, and you need to acknowledge this. Also, when bank reports to its to people who give funds, impact fund reports to its funders, there are those transparency and trust issues at every step. So blockchain helps to eliminate them, creating like a very clear picture of what is going on.
Yeah, so like one city can't kind of color the results to make it look like they're doing better than they really are.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Like what cities or countries are part of this program right now?
Which program?
The Open Sensor Network.
We're partnering not so much with cities, but with individual NGOs. So Russia, obviously, because we're there. We also have partners in African countries, like in Togo. I think there would be some other pilots in probably Asian countries, but we're just launching, so it's not yet decided. But will be many partners from all over the world, I think.
Yeah. Have you deployed any sensors yet?
So, yeah, I was the first one to test this project, right? So I was doing this in India, making environmental measurements. And our first project, I think, will be in this African country. So we're in the middle of launching it, actually.
So you have all the sensors and like running network and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
You're just in the deployment phase right now.
Yes. So the network is running. Yeah, I tested it. Works perfectly. Like the good thing is that it's really convenient and easy to use for non-technical guys. So I think it will be not very difficult for any kind of NGOs. So yeah, everything is ready to be deployed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like this information seems really valuable in helping these decisions. What kind of trends do you see coming out of this once people have these tools to make decisions in a more decentralized way?
That's a very good question, because actually right now there is a big wave coming. And if several years back in 2016, when our team was starting this project, this was pretty much grassroots. Now all these trends are coming from above, from United Nations. So at COP25 at Climate Conference, UNFCCC, the main body which is responsible for climate change, announced that they're very much interested in blockchain, IoT, and AI for climate challenge, and they see a great potential. Like a couple of weeks back in Brussels, there was an event called DLT for Europe Green Deal, which is pretty amazing. You know, very high-level officials are now actually talking about real cases of blockchain implementation for climate. If previously it was mostly about research, about some pilot projects, now they're actually allocating funds for this. And also in Berlin, last week, there was an event of Sustainable Development Solutions Network also related to these issues, with very high-level representative of development banks. So there is a very big wave coming. There are a lot of opportunities, and it's pretty amazing. But there are also challenges, and some of them are solved by Substrate technology, which is why we are particularly interested in building on Substrate. So one is interoperability challenge, that you need to make sure that blockchain is scalable, that it is interoperable, that it's like a real internet of blockchains. And this is something that everyone is looking for. And the other issue is carbon footprint of blockchain. So this is an issue that you cannot avoid, and everyone is saying, proof of work is not really environmental friendly, and there need to be other mechanisms. And this is also what Substrate and Polkadot have, like other mechanisms which are more climate friendly. So those are the opportunities. And there are actually a lot of even international organizations related specifically to blockchain for climate. So, for example, there is Climate Chain Coalition, founded also at one of the climate conferences at a couple of years back. And our PCI was actually one of the founding members. So they're also thinking about the best ways to apply blockchain and IoT for impact measurement and for climate finance. Another pretty amazing thing, pretty trendy, is that at next COP there is going to be a digital innovation zone for the first time. A lot of things coming, and this is definitely the area that is interesting to watch. So, and a lot of potential for Parity Technologies, for Substrate technology there.
Yeah, when is the COP conference?
December in Glasgow.
Yeah, so okay, in Glasgow it'll be cold and dark, I guess.
Yeah, it will be very windy. Like Glasgow is super windy place.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you hope to have? Like, that's almost a year away. Like, what would you hope to see at this UN, at the COP conference for their digital track?
So, real use cases, of course. We hope to see real use cases by companies, by innovators, all represented at the Digital Innovation Zone. From our side, we're also planning to present several use cases. The platform for impact measurement and investment that I mentioned. We're going to showcase a couple of use cases at COP26 anyways, and the outcomes of the initiative Blockchain for Open Sensors Network. So we really hope that there will be examples of work that has been done by different companies in terms of smart cities, in terms of innovation and blockchain, because there is a lot to show, and there will be even more coming.
Yeah, and then as far as launching this program and your other Evercity programs, what are your plans for this year?
So for Evercity platform, the main plan is to have at least three use cases on impact measurement and on sustainable digital finance. So one use case will be related to energy, to issuance of renewable energy certificates, and probably to tracking the origin of biomass for biomass power plants, using IoT devices and satellite data and creating digital passports like certificates proving that the biomass has been sustainably sourced. Other use case will be related to smart agriculture because it is another key thing for climate change. There are two main topics for climate. One is energy and the other is agriculture because there are two mostly contributing sectors to climate change. So in agriculture, as I mentioned, we're planning a use case in Indonesia where we're going to monitor different plantations, coffee and melon plantations using satellites, also drones and IoT. And we're going to present this at ASEAN Smart City conference that we're also organizing in spring. And the third case will be related to digital finance and to impact allocation. And so we'll also see about this and try to present all of this at COP26.
And where do you see this Robonomics data fitting in?
So Robonomics is like our main partner and main framework for integration of data from different types of devices, IoT and drones and so on, to blockchain. So Robonomics are our main technical partners for this sphere, and we'll be definitely working with them in all our initiatives.
Yeah, so across all three.
Yeah, across all three.
Yeah, okay. I think we can wrap it up there, unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
Yes, just in general, I'd like to really thank you for having us here. And it's like we are very proud to be within your community, within Parity community. One of our main advisors, Denis Soldat, if you probably know him, he's a Parity DevOps, and he's the one who advised us to use Substrate for our initiatives in the first place. So we're very much grateful for you that you're providing those technologies, which we can apply for our purposes, for climate and for environment. So we'll be happy to continue cooperating with you, maybe to have some joint events, some workshops. Maybe we would like to tell you more how you could use your technologies for climate, because this wave is really coming and it's going to be very important. So yeah, hope to cooperate with you more on this.
Yeah, thank you for coming to Berlin to do this. And where should people go to find out more about Evercity?
Sure. We'll put some links probably to description in this video, links to our presentations at COP25 and others. And we also have a website, of course, and Medium with our articles. So we'll provide all those links in this video.
Great. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening to Relay Chain. We'd love to keep in touch. Follow us on Twitter at RelayChain or email podcast@parity.io. Our team at Parity includes some of the leading peer-to-peer networking developers, consensus algorithm inventors, blockchain innovators, and Rust developers. If you want to learn more about our work or want to work with us, visit our website at parity.io and sign up for our newsletter at parity.io/newsletter.